You remember from a couple of years ago, we showcased a video in our coverage of the Ugandan finance minister who was brought to testify in front of a parliamentary committee about the fiasco surrounding the Entebbe Airport loan. And this was a whole drama that popped up. It was during the pandemic, if I recall, I think 22. And one of the things that he said in front of the Parliamentary Oversight Committee was, when he was asked, he was pressured, they said, "Why did you sign this contract that had such, stiff repayment terms?" Again, the parliamentarians were very upset with the terms of the contract. And the finance minister, he acknowledged what a lot of people assumed was, he said, "We didn't understand the contract." And that wasn't because they're stupid. It's only because these contracts are incredibly complex. And there is an information asymmetry. And the Chinese are bringing a different way of doing business than the way they've dealt with other creditors in the past. And so I really hope that there's an opportunity for mid-level bureaucrats within African finance ministries to find ways to improve their knowledge of Chinese finance and development finance so that they can close those information asymmetries. And if we can do that as a whole, then I think you're going to have a healthier economic relationship between African borrowers and Chinese creditors. So this is actually not about playing into the debt trap BS that we hear so much about. This is actually just to build a healthier ecosystem between the two.
Exactly. And I mean, as researchers like Folashade Sule have shown, there are African negotiators who are doing a good job, who do understand how these contracts work. And it's not only having good people in place, but there are a whole set of strategies that African policymakers can follow to make their negotiations more robust and to get the terms that they want. It certainly is possible, like African countries have managed to pull it off. So I really hope that some of the bad experiences of that countries like Zambia have gone through are also occasions for learning, in moving forward. Because the one thing that, we obviously say all the time is that the Africa-China relationship isn't going away. It's a new reality. It's a new structural reality. So for African countries to work better with China, to learn how to do that, is an investment in the future of the continent.
Just a reminder that last year, 2023, the Chinese lent $4.6 billion. And this is, again, a variety of creditors, lent $4.6 billion to, I think it was somewhere between 8 and 10 African countries. So lending is on the rebound. That's according to Boston University's Global Development Policy Center. But once again, just to put African debt to China in context, that today it accounts for about 11% of the total. And that is often overlooked. And when we look at the volumes of private creditor debt, mostly Eurobond and also multilateral debt, vastly higher. And so at the height of Chinese lending to Africa, it was about 18% of the total debt. So that context is very important, Cobus, to understand how it fits within the broader picture. And again, oftentimes when we talk about Chinese mining in Africa or Chinese debt in Africa, people don't include that contextual piece there. So Chinese mining, total output of Chinese mining from Africa is 6.7% of the total. So just like the debt, I think it's much smaller than a lot of people assume it to be. But because the narratives are so loud and the headlines are just nonstop about Chinese loans in Africa, I think a lot of people think it's a much bigger slice of the pie than it actually is.
Yeah, and these narratives become a way for Western stakeholders, particularly, to not acknowledge how complicit they are in keeping Africa poor and entrenching underdevelopment in Africa, and how unjust some of the stuff they do are as well. So, for example, COP29 is happening as we're recording, and I was taken aback when I was doing background reading, around some of the issues, at how much of the commitments, the climate commitments from the countries that caused the climate crisis, and therefore who are essentially writing the death sentence of humanity, how much of that financing is in the form of loans and is in the form of commercial loans. So to continually be braying on about Chinese debt traps is a way of not talking about the structural centrality of Western finance and Western capital and Western politics in the problems that we face in Africa. And, and that is why it's so important, I think, to highlight work like this, because this is what we need. Like, we need to talk about real stuff rather than made up narratives. And this report really gives an into the real nature of this relationship.